This conference will now be recorded.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Vicki Kirtley. I'm the programs manager for the Nurse Aide Registry. And it's really different for me with just 3 people here, so you're going to have to bear with me. Because one of the things about this class that I've always enjoyed is the interaction that goes on between everyone. And if you ever have a question, please stop me. I'm really known for bouncing around a lot. So you do have the slides. So you can go back to if you need to. And I know that he'll give them to you if you want them. One of the things, and I guess I'll just ask, I don't know if you guys out there will answer any of this or not, but one thing I usually like to ask is how many, and I'll just, you 3 will get to raise your hands, but how many of you already are working as an administrator in a facility? How many of you are working in a facility right now? 1.
I'm currently working in a facility.
I'm sorry, that kind of came garbled.
I said I'm working in a facility at the moment.
Good, okay. How many of you have never worked in a facility? Okay, I'll ask you then why. Have you had a loved one in a facility that you?
Yeah, my wife has worked in, she's
Your wife is
RN,
working
and she has.
One of the things that I was a long-term care administrator before OBRA came into effect. That really tells you how old I am. Also, I'm fixing to retire. You guys are my last class to teach. And so it feels kind of strange for me because you guys are moving forward and I'm ending a 30-year career that's been with long-term care and with the state health department. So I always like to find out kind of who I'm talking to when I'm giving this class, because it kind of, some people will understand more about what I'm talking about when I'm talking about the aides if you've worked in a facility. And some of you, if you don't understand, just ask me, okay? Let's see if this works. And it doesn't. So let me go back and move the mouse. Yeah, now it works. Okay. So the first thing, and I'll just kind of move my stuff around, and he told me I couldn't turn around very much or it wouldn't go over the microphone. So the first area of aides that we're going to talk about are certified medication aides. And they're kind of different from the other aides because they have specific criteria that they have to be a certified medication aide. They have to read, write, and speak English. They currently have to be certified as a long-term care aide, a home health aide, and a developmentally direct care aide. One thing that's different with them is they have an age limit. They have to be 18 years old. Your other aides, they can be 16. They also are different because they have to have a high school diploma or a GED. And they have to have experience working as a certified nurse aide or when I say, I hate using that term, certified nurse aide. For some reason, it's in a lot of state guidelines, rules, statutes, but Oklahoma is different from any other state in the fact that we don't have a certified nurse aide. Though most people think a certified nurse aide means long-term care. But in Oklahoma, we have long-term care, home health, residential care, adult daycare, developmentally direct care. I think that's it. And then you have your certified medication aide. So in that respect, when you see the term CNA, it usually is going to mean a long-term care aide. And one of the other things that it says in writing, in rule, is that they have to have the physical and mental capability to do the job. It doesn't say that on any of the other aides. And why would you think that? Anybody want to respond? No? Because a certified medication aide in some ways is capable of doing more harm than any other aide. Because if they give the wrong medication, if they can't read well, if they don't understand English well enough, and they give the wrong medication, then they have a good chance of really hurting someone, killing someone. So that's why I think more rules are put on a certified medication aide than even just a regular aide. Even though a regular aide can do harm, if you give someone the wrong medication, you could kill them. And also certified medication aides are always under the supervision of an RN in the facility. So that RN can get in trouble if the CMA does anything wrong. And I don't know why I keep hitting the wrong one. Okay, so one of the things that I always like to tell administrators is you really need to be aware of the rules that the aides that work for you are under, and that is Chapter 677. And in Chapter 677, it will tell you that the Certified Medication Aide training program is 40 hours. And that's combined classroom, and it's also 16 hours of practical training. So that means that aide has to go into a nursing facility and give meds. They have to do 16 hours of that in the facility. How many of you have aides right now in training that are coming into your facility to do their training? Anyone want to respond out there? Okay. What they're going to have to do when they come into the facility is they're going to have to pass meds to 20 individuals. They're going to have to be able to use the cart, and they're going to have to be able to write in the MAR. And so one thing that when you become an administrator, if you have a training program that wants to come in and do their skills or their practical training in your facility, please know that you do not ever let them go around on the cart with another aide. It always has to have an instructor with them when they're in training. You don't want to let an aide, another CMA cannot be a preceptor, okay? And if you see that, you need to call the health department, the Nurse Aide Registry, and let them know that that training program is not doing what they're supposed to. One of the things that I will tell you right now, and I hate to say it because I hate to go out this way. The Nurse Aide Registry has always been caught up with the renewals. Like we get the aides renewals and they're usually renewed that day or the next day and we're caught up. Right now, the Nurse Aide Registry is 4 weeks behind. And it is causing havoc on the facilities and also on the aides. We're working with legal right now to try to get some kind of assistance with letting them have more time in a grace period. Because of the governor's suspension of renewals that ended January 31st, everybody waited to renew, especially certified medication aides, because they have to have 8 hours of continuing education. They're the only aide that has to have that. And so the schools were closed, the career techs, and everybody waited. And so after January, then we had all these CMAs that were trying to get in to a CMA CEU update class. Some of the schools were still closed in their area. They couldn't get it. So we had all this influx of CMA renewals coming in. And just the regular renewals. So between that and my staff having COVID and some deaths that went on during that time period too, we got 4 weeks behind. So right now is kind of a rough time for the aides and for the Nurse Aide Registry. But on a CMA renewal, they have to send in by mail now because the health department moved. I don't know how many of you know that, but the health department has moved to downtown Oklahoma City. We're now on Robert S. Kerr. Used to be the Synergy building, and now there's a whole bunch of state offices in this one building. When they did that, the Nurse Aide Registry went from having a desk downstairs where they could do on-site renewals to not being able to do that anymore. So if a CMA has to renew and send in their $10 fee, they're going to have to do it through the mail now, which is also another problem because they can't do that quick turnaround that they used to do. So we have to have the $10 fee and we have to have a copy of their CMA CEU update class for them to renew. If we don't have that, then we have to send them a letter, a problem letter, and tell them that we can't renew them until we get that, which they can then, if it's just a certificate that we're needing, they can fax that to us. So if the CMA, they have the very first year that they're a CMA and they've been trained, they don't need a CEU update. They just came out of training, so we don't make them do that. But every year thereafter, your CMA has to go to a CMA CEU update class every year. If they don't, we won't renew them. Okay, so like I said, the CMA must submit that recertification application, $10 fee, copy of their CMA CEU for us to renew them. So if they don't renew timely, then they have to retest if their certification has expired more than 1 year. So we give them a whole year after expiration to go and get a CEU update, and then we'll still go ahead and renew them. But the one thing about doing a retest is you only get one shot at it. And if you don't pass that retest, then you have to go back and retrain to be a CMA. So for what I like to tell, and this is getting off kind of the path a little bit, is what I like to tell long-term care administrators is to make sure that either you or your HR, whoever handles that, has some kind of tickler system set up where they know when the nurses' license expire, they know when their CMAs, their long-term care aides, they know when everyone's license expires in that building. And then that way, if you put it a month or two, they could renew 6 months in advance. Okay? It's a really good idea to make sure you know that. So they don't get caught in case we're running behind. And they don't wait until the last minute to get a CMA CU update class, because what happens with that is if they're going to a career tech to get it, and that career tech doesn't have enough students for the update class, they cancel it, which then could make that aide not renew timely, and then you've got someone on the floor who's not certified. So try to do a tickler system where you're always about at least 3 months in advance. And that way you don't have to worry about getting caught unaware when long-term care comes in. And it's amazing to me, we have had aides, and I've been having to help answer the phones lately because we're so short-staffed. And hearing aides tell me, I've been working, I'll ask them, I said, you're expired. Are you having any trouble? Are you working on the floor? And when did you expire? Some of these aides are telling me they have been working for the same company since 2019 with an expired certification. And I'm like, oh my God. How is this happening? Somebody's fallen asleep at the wheel. And that facility's been really lucky that they haven't had surveyors come in during that time period, and they haven't got zapped for that. So try to make sure that you've got that some kind of, I mean, back in my day, it was a little, metal box with the cards in it, and I'd put them 3 months in advance. And I, the administrator, did that. We didn't have what seems to be what you do have now with your HRs. They can put that on the computer and pull it up. So there's no reason for you to ever be caught unaware if someone's in your building with an expired certification, no matter what they are. Also for the CMA, this is kind of just repeating what we've been saying. The CMA can't renew if their long-term care or their home health or their DDCA, they can't go and take a CEU update class if that main certification is not current. So you need to make sure that, because to be a CMA, they also have to have that long-term care certification. And that's what we'll kind of talk about more than anything. Long-term, and we'll get to them, but there's no reason for them to not be current on their long-term care certification. Their long-term care certification is free. So there's no reason why as a facility that you cannot, if you've got that tickler system, why you can't have them come in, sign off on the application. You've already filled out their work proof, because the long-term care aide has to have work proof to renew. And then everything else they can fill out, and then you can send it in. So a CMA should never have an expired long-term care, home health, or DDCA cert. So an aide may not attend an advanced training if CMA is expired more than 1 year. Okay? If a CMA has expired more than 1 year, what's the one thing they're supposed to do? What happens? They retest. Okay? And programs may not accept aides with expired CMA certifications or those advanced training programs. One of the things that we kind of have a problem with sometimes, right, and I hate it because the facility, if they're paying for it, it takes away their money, and then it takes away the aide's money. But on advanced CMAs, sometimes the career techs will let them come in and take an advanced course when they're expired, and we won't put it on until they get their CMA taken care of, or they get their long-term care taken care of. So don't send someone to an advanced or even to a CMA CEU update class if their long-term care is expired. Okay. And then the other thing to remember is that very first year they become a CMA, they don't have to have CEUs. What we've seen is some of the facilities are making these people go and take a class, and they're paying for it. They don't pay for it. Don't send them. They do not have to have a CMA CEU update class if it's their first year to renew. So don't just, they kind of, I've seen facilities kind of herd all of their CMAs together and make them go take a class, and you're wasting your money. Because sometimes the career techs don't tell you they don't have to have one because it's their first year. That's something you've got to remember. So one of the advanced training programs, well, this gives all of them really. An advanced CMA training program will count towards 8 hours of a CEU. And a lot of facilities and a lot of aides want to do this because it just benefits the facilities. If they're going to have to take a CEU update class, then take an advanced class, and then they can do all the advanced skills. So a glucose monitoring and insulin administration class, it takes 16 hours, so it's 2 days of classes. A glucose monitoring only is 8 hours. Respiratory, nasogastro, when it's done all together, is 8 hours. Nasogastro by itself is 6 hours, and respiratory is 3 hours. So that's not very many. So if they only took the respiratory, we wouldn't count it as a CEU update because For one thing, what? It's not 8 hours. Okay? So the glucose monitoring and insulin program is 12 hours of classroom training and 4 hours of supervised practical training, or 16 hours. And one of the things with the insulin administration class, it's the only one of the advanced CMAs that they actually have to take a test. And if they don't pass it, they don't get it. Okay? How many, well, it's hard to ask that question, but do you have insulin advanced CMAs in your facility? Insulin? A lot of facilities are going away from that because they don't want to take the risk, and they're having their nurses do it now.
Right, our nurses, I mean, we prefer the nurses to actually do it, but if something goes crazy, we do have.
You do have them
Yeah,
trained to
that they
do it.
can if they need
Yeah.
to, yeah.
That sounds good. Most of the facilities have glucose monitoring where they can do the finger stick, but they don't want them given insulin. And I don't blame them.
Yeah.
I mean, because so many things can go wrong, and especially, well, we'll get to that when we get to what a CMA can and cannot do. So if it's glucose monitoring only that a facility wants them to come and get trained on, it's only 6 hours of classroom and a minimum of 2 hours of supervised. So it doesn't take quite so long just for your glucose. And that's just learning how to do finger sticks. And then the CMA respiratory nasal gastrostomy, that program is a combined minimum 8 hours of classroom and supervised training. So therefore, that would count for that CEU 8 hours update. The nasogastric and gastrostomy training only is a minimum of 4 hours of classroom and 2 hours of practical training. It has an informal test, with skill being 100% and didactic being 80%. And then we have your respiratory only. And it's an informal exam. It's only 2 hours of classroom and 1 hour of supervised practical training. And it has a skills exam, which they have to do 100%, and didactic is 80%. So everybody understand CMA Advanced? Okay. When the CMA renews their certification, the advanced CMAs are only endorsements. They're kind of just attached to their certification. It's not like these advanced courses are certifications that stand alone. So if that CMA lets their certification expire, their advances expire also. But when they go to renew, they're only going to renew their CMA, and then we come in and renew all the advances. So say I had a certification as a CMA that expires 5/31, and all my advances expire 5/31. The aide would only have to send in $10 and an 8-hour CEU update certificate. And then we would go in and we would renew the CMA, and then we would change the dates on all their advances. So they only need $10. They don't need $10 for every advanced endorsement that they have. Okay, a lot of times we've had aides send in $30 because they had the CMA and they thought they had to send in money for their advanced CMAs and they don't. So I know that this sounds dry and boring, but it's going to matter when you're out there and you're having to take care of these people. So now we're going to get into the functions of a CMA. And one of the most important things that CMA has to know is they have to be able to review the resident's plan of care. They have to be a part of that. They have to recognize what is normal and what is abnormal for that resident. It doesn't mean that they do the assessment, but I mean, most people, if you walk in, you'll know if someone's different or not today. You'll know if after you give a medication, if someone starts to act different. And if that happens, they have to be able to recognize it and notify the nurse. They have to be able to collect and document data and identify a change in a condition and notify their RN or DON or LPN charge nurse. So CMAs have to report to a licensed nurse or a physician. They have to be able to contact emergency services, medical services. They have to receive facility-specific training and orientation from the facility's licensed nurse. They have to demonstrate competency and proficiency, and they have to receive delegated tasks from the facility's licensed nurse and perform them by delegation. Okay. So one of the things that when you first hire a CMA that you're going to want your charge nurse or your DNA or DON to do is to take that individual, and it's on our web page if you want it. It's the skills performance checklist for CMA, and you want them to take them around and see if they can actually do a med pass, and if they actually can do the skills of a CMA. And this should be done once a year. And you're welcome to use the forms that we have on the Nurse Aide Registry, because somebody can tell you that they're a CMA and they may even have years of experience, but if you took them around, you might find that's why they're not at their last job. It's because they're not very good at it. And especially if you hire someone that is straight out of training, you have to remember they've only had 40 hours of training and 16 hours skill. That means they've only been in a nursing facility and passed meds under the protection of their instructor, and usually another CMA from the facility will walk with them, but that instructor needs to be there. So they have not had a whole lot of experience. So when you hire a new CMA, you want to make sure that you kind of have someone help them along for a while. Because they may, I know I'm over the training programs and the curriculum, and we approve them, but I just don't feel just real comfortable with 40 hours. Okay, so they're really, when they come to you that way, I think that as a facility, it's kind of your responsibility in a way to do a little bit more training with them before you just say, here's the cart, and here you go, and hope that they do really well. Okay? So facility requirements for CMA, skills need to be reviewed before administering for the, like when they first get hired, and then you're supposed to do that every year. And then keep that in their personnel file, okay? So the facility center or home shall validate those CMA skills before the CMA performs medication administration. So your nurse should be going with them. And they're gonna say if this person is proficient in this skill or not. I would hate to have someone that do respiratory or nasogastro and not really know what they're doing. Okay, so besides just the basics, if you have someone come in that's got the advanced skills, you want to make sure that they know how to do those too. And they have to be reviewed annually. Okay, this should just be in part of your policy for your facility also. So then we get to what CMAs cannot do. Okay, you would be surprised at the number of phone calls we get on these questions. And what some facilities think that CMAs should be allowed to do. So you really need to know what they can't do. They can't administer medication that requires assessment unless a registered nurse is available to perform that assessment in the required amount of time. They cannot, this should be a no-brainer. It should be, but it's not. They cannot perform oral, nasal, or tracheal suctioning. We've actually had the CMAs do. Yeah. Yes. Every one of these do nots, the reason they're here is because someone's done it. That's usually, usually that's how it goes. Nobody thinks anything of it until somebody actually does it. And then you're like, oh, we've got to make sure we write this up. They cannot apply topical wound care if there is a decubitus. Okay, which that's going to require an assessment by the nurse to know if that spot is a decubitus or not. Okay, so if you come up with a spot that looks red, that you're kind of not sure, that CMA should be able to notice that and go get the nurse and let them assess that. Okay, and not put any topical wounds on. And please do not let your CMA be a preceptor for a medication-aided training if you have a school coming in. And I get really frustrated with this because I've had training programs that have brought their students in and left them. Oh, and the CMA of the facility didn't know, and the facility didn't know any better either, I don't guess. And they thought it was okay. And they let their CMA take the aide that's in training and train them. And let them give meds. I happened to, this is when, before I became the program manager of the Nurse Aide Registry, I was a surveyor and I just got lucky one day and hit a facility that I knew the training program was using as a skilled facility. And I went there that day and they were there. And so I went and found the aide that was in training that was doing the med card pass. And lo and behold, no instructor, but a CMA from the facility. And so I didn't say anything. I didn't, go, oh, you shouldn't be here without your instructor. I just decided to watch. And I don't know if it was me or this girl was just this way before I got there, but she was scared to death to give meds. And she went into a ladies' room, and there were 2 rooms. And in this facility, they had a picture above the bed of the resident and their name, which I thought was really, I hadn't seen that in a facility. Not every facility does that. So she got the meds, and I noticed that the name on the med that she got was not the name of the person laying in the bed. And I thought, okay, how long do I stand here, and who's going to say something, and who's going to notice it? And so she was to the point of actually handing the med when before I could say anything, the CMA from the facility said, look up at the picture and look at your med. You're fixing to give the wrong med to the wrong person. I mean, and that's how accidents happen. And that's why we don't want the facility to have to put up with that, for one thing, and the instructor should have been there. So the instructor got an earful when she walked back from wherever she had been and saw me standing there. So if you see that in your facility, if you're going to let students, because a lot of facilities like to have people in training come and do their skills training in their facility, because it's another hand to help. And it's a good way to get a little bit more care with the instructor there and that aide. But if you don't see that instructor going around with those aides in training, then either tell them they have to, don't let them sit in the nurse's section with your other nurse, because that's where I found some too. They have to be on the floor with that person. So a CMA cannot administer PRN medication without a documented assessment unless authorization is obtained from a licensed nurse on duty or on call, and unless fully documented by the certified medication aide. This mainly affects, I don't think long-term care facilities have that much problem with this, because there's always a nurse. But in assisted living centers where they don't have nurses there all the time, this sometimes can be a problem. Okay, they cannot perform blood glucose testing unless the CMA completed a department-approved training program and they've demonstrated competency for the care of diabetics or diabetes. They cannot administer insulin unless the CMA has also taken that advanced training and unless a physician or a licensed nurse is on site. And if the individual is newly diagnosed with diabetes, they cannot be the one to do any work with them. Or if it requires insulin administration based on a blood glucose level and does not have a clear physician's order or variable or sliding scale insulin, or has unstable diabetes. So they can't perform, basically, they can't perform any of the advanced CMA skills unless they've been through the training and unless your nurse has made sure that they're skilled at it, that they're proficient. Not halfway skilled, but truly proficient at doing that. And they cannot take, and this was was a surprise to me that they would even think that they could do this. They cannot note or take physician's orders over the phone. The nurse has to. So if the CMA gets in trouble, there's grounds for denial, suspension, withdrawal, and non-renewal of certification. Those are the things that we can do. If they intentionally provide false or misleading information to the training program, the facility, or the department. If they fail to administer medications as ordered by a healthcare professional, which results in actual harm that is either life-threatening or has a negative outcome for the individual. If they fail to consistently document the medications that are given, altering or falsifying certified nurse aid or medication aid identification cards, I need to take that off because we don't have cards anymore. And the reason we don't is because people were doing this. They were committing fraud and they were putting their name on a card and trying to slide in that way. So we got rid of cards or diverting drugs. Really, if they do any of these things right here, you're going to file an incident report, 718, and you're going to send it to long-term care complaints. Because if they do any of these things, they can get abuse put on them or misappropriation. Okay? And we'll get into that later on. So they cannot practicing nursing or medicine except as authorized in law. So don't ask them to do something that they were not trained for. Okay? They can't represent themselves as a CMA when they're not one. And they cannot administer medication in a setting other than those authorized by law. Okay, so for you guys, you don't have to worry about that. That's something that a CMA can work for a jail. They can work in corrections. They can work for any type of facility, long-term care, developmentally disabled, residential, and adult daycare. And materially failing to conform to the law and to the subchapter 13. Subchapter 13 is in chapter 677, and it's one that you should get familiar with on what they can and cannot do. So if they get in trouble, we can deny, suspend, withdraw, or not renew them. That can happen along with them getting abuse, misappropriation, or neglect. A suspension cannot be more than 6 months. I've only seen one suspension in the time period that I've been with the Nurse Aide Registry. And denial, withdrawal, or non-renew not less than 1 year. So this just talks about that skills review that we talked about earlier. How often is it supposed to be done? Every year. So the facility also has some responsibilities with CMAs. If you use the CMA, the facility shall have policies and procedures that address ensuring that the training, skill validation, and task assignment procedures are approved and implemented, license supervision, oversight, and availability, and staff intervention during an emergency. Okay? And that book needs to be with the policy book, does not need to be locked up in the long-term care administrator's office. Because if something happens at night, or when you're not there, it needs to be in a location that everyone can get to it. And everyone knows where it's at. okay? Some of the things that I see surveyors writing up facilities on is that they don't have policies. I mean, you have to have a policy for everything. You have to think about everything that could go wrong, even if it sounds outlandish, and have a policy, what they're to do if that was to happen. Because it's amazing to me the weird things that can happen in a facility. I mean, everybody's human, so anything goes when you talk about something crazy happening. And the worst thing that can happen is for there to be some disaster or a fire or flooding or just something that just comes out from nowhere. And everybody's like, what do we do? What do we do? And no one knows the policy on it. So you can have a book full of good policies. This is my other spiel. You can have a book full of good policies, but if you don't train your staff on it, then you might as well not have it. So some of those in-services that you will have to give, you need to go over policies on what would happen in case of an emergency. What would happen in case of a fire if you had an individual refuse to leave? And they were a big person and it took 2 or 3 people to move them. Those are the type of things that you're going to have policies on. There should be a policy for reporting errors to licensed nurses and physicians. This is another one that I see write-ups from surveyors, is that there was an error that the aide did not report to the nurse, or the aide reported it to the nurse and the nurse didn't write it down. Okay, so this kind of needs to be drilled in. And reporting violations of the law in Chapter 677 to the department. If a facility uses the CMA with advanced training, you've got to have policies on that. You've got to have standards for monitoring and assessment by an RN and an MD, including training, orientation, and delegation from the facility, drawing up insulin, the minimum qualifications for CMA and facility screening of applicants to include assurance that each CMA has the physical and mental capabilities to safely perform duties. One of the other reasons that I just thought of on needing these policies and having everybody know where they're at is because what happens is turnover. And so if you have a high turnover rate in your facility with nurses or with aides, then this thing with policies, you can't just train on it once and then think it's done. You've got to do it ever so often to ensure that everybody in your facility always knows what the policy is, okay? And where they can find the book if they don't. You can have several books, one for each wing at the nurse's station, but just don't have one that's locked away in your office. So you've even got to have policies about charting and graphing and recording, standards for reporting to the licensed nurse or physician on a timely basis, which includes medication errors. One of the things that I see on surveys is maybe there was a medication error, but it didn't get written up for 2 or 3 days. It did get written And especially for contacting emergency medical services. If something goes on at night, then, or at any time, that the aide needs to know what they are supposed to do in case of a medical emergency. We've got to have policies for training, orientation, delegation from the facility. That's the same one. Did I just do that? Policy for following physician's orders, including use of sliding scale orders, and safety and infection and control. And I was talking to someone just recently that was from long-term care, that was kind of over the infection and safety control. And that's one of the biggies that gets written up every time on surveys. It's in the top 10 deficiencies every time. So you want to have policies and procedures on that, and especially now that we have COVID. Okay? And that means that we've come to the long-term care aides. And how many of you, I've only got 3, but the people out there too, would y'all like to take a break now, or would you like for me to go on? I'll leave it up to you. Huh?
You can keep going.
Keep going, I want to get out of here.
Keep going. I won't be gone but 3 minutes.
Okay. CFR is the federal definition of a nurse aide. It's the code of federal regulations. How many of you are familiar with that? I'm sure you haven't had training on it in here? Federal Code 42, Title 42, Federal Code. Federal Code is what makes state laws and what we base our regulations off of. The Chapter 677 is for the Nurse Aide Registry. It has the rules and regulations for each type of aide we have, and on renewals, and on retests, and on reciprocity. So if you want to know anything about the Nurse Aide Registry, you'll find it in Chapter 677. But CMS is all about Title 42, okay? So a nurse aide means that any individual providing nursing or nurse-related services to residents in a facility who is not a licensed health professional, a registered dietitian, or someone who volunteers to provide such services without pay. The CFR defines a facility to mean a Medicare certified skilled facility or a Medicaid certified nursing facility. The CFR authorizes renewal of certification without retraining, or retesting if a nurse aide has worked in a Medicare or Medicaid certified nursing facility for pay in the previous 24 months. Okay, that's the definition of a nurse aide. So the thing with long-term care and home health and developmentally direct care aides in Oklahoma, we only require 75 hours of training for those aides. Okay, that's not very much. California requires 150. Other states require 96 to 120, but Oklahoma only does the minimum. And the minimum that federal code requires is 75 hours. So within that 75 hours, you have 16 hours of classroom. You've got 16 hours of practical training, and practical is the skills training. And then you've got 10 hours of that has to be Alzheimer's training. And then you have to have approved clinical sites. So you can't just go anywhere you want to if you're a training program for clinicals. So it's 75 hours, 46 hours are required training. That leaves 20 hours, 29 hours left to train on anything else. So that does not give that aide a whole lot of training either. Okay? So before an aide is allowed to come into your facility, say you have aides in training in your facility doing clinicals. One of the things that they have to have is an initial 16 hours, 2 days of training, and it has to be on these subjects: communication and interpersonal skills, infection control, safety emergency procedures, the Heimlich maneuver, promoting a resident's independence and their rights. They cannot go out on the floor until they, or touch a resident until they've had these 2 days worth of training. Also, certified nurse aides have a scope of responsibility. Okay, that's what they call it, scope, and a specific role in resident care. And the CNA scope of practice refers to the tasks within their skilled set. Okay, just like the CMA has a lot of cannots, the long-term care aide has certain things they can do and certain things they cannot do. And you would be surprised the questions we get on this also. Because the long-term care aide cannot give meds. Okay? They can't do anything with medication. Nothing. And they cannot perform any service that they haven't been found proficient in. So that means if you have a brand new long-term care aide come into your facility, fresh out of training, they've only had 75 hours of training, and they've only had 16 hours of training in a facility. So that means you're going to need to take them around. There's a skills performance checklist for long-term care aides on the Nurse Aide Registry site. You need to print that off and have your nurse take the aides, the ones that you're just now hiring, and I would say even the ones that you've got every year, and take them and see if they know the skills that's listed on that skills performance checklist. Okay? Because it's subjective, for one thing, if someone is proficient or not. In a lot of ways, it is. I hate to say that, but what I may find someone proficient, someone else may look at it and go, no, they're not. So you want to make sure when you hire someone that you take them around and find that they do know their skill set. And they cannot perform any services that they have not been trained on. Okay? This is what happens a lot in facilities, is they'll think their RN can train them on something, and that allows them to be able to do it. And that is not the case. Because if something happens, and say that turns into an abuse, an incident, abuse, misappropriation, or neglect, the aide is going to come back and say, I was never trained to do that in school, and I'm not allowed to do it, but they were making me do it. Okay, so as a nurse, if any of you are nurses, I would not have an aide do anything that they weren't trained to do. Okay? And one thing that you need to know is that when the aide goes through training and then they test, it can take up to 30 days for that aide's test results to be downloaded into the Nurse Aide Registry database. We have a lot of facilities that will call us and say, they've come to us with their coaching report. We know that they passed it. Can we go ahead and put them on the floor? No. They have to be listed in the Nurse Aide Registry before they can be hired. Because for one thing, when you hire any new aide, you're going to have to run them through the National Background Check Program. And one of the things that the National Background Check Program has you do is run them through the Nurse Aide Registry. And you're going to want to do that because you're going to want to see if they've got abuse on them. They're going to be red, and it's going to tell you. And besides, you're going to want to know if there's a barrier on them. That shows up. I think even the pendings show up on the National Background Check Program, which would show that maybe they had been reported on an incident, but it wasn't confirmed, and they haven't had a hearing yet. We have a lot of incident reports that come in on nurse aides that never go past the investigation because they find out through the investigation that it really was not abuse, misappropriation, or neglect. Okay. So if an aide is not listed within 30 days after they test, then you need to inform us of that and let us check with the testing site and see why, because there may be something. We had a facility kept calling saying we were wanting to hire this girl. She took her test. We don't know what's wrong. We found out that the testing site had changed one of her social security numbers, so she came in, but she was under the wrong social. So we had to get that fixed. So just know that if you have someone that you're really wanting to hire and they don't show up within 30 days, contact us and we'll check it out and see what happened. So we are no longer, and I think this pretty much, I say this and then we have people call and ask for a card, but do not ask an aide for a card. We don't do them anymore. What you're supposed to do is go to the Nurse Aide Registry website, and they're under there on the top left-hand corner, it says verify certification. All you need to do is put in their name. It says certification number 2, but you don't have to put that in, just their name. And then it will show up, and there may be 5 or 6 people with the same name, but it'll give enough information that you'll know which one you need. And then over in the right-hand corner, there's going to be this, what I call, it looks like an eyeball, and it means view. Click that, and then the person will come up. If they don't, contact the Nurse Aide Registry, and we'll look them up for you, okay, and let you know. At any time you have any questions about an aide, you can't find them on the Verify Nurse Aide, or you're wondering if they're telling you the truth we've had a lot of facilities doing this lately. If they're calling us and wanting to know what's going on with the Nurse Aide Registry. This aide told us she mailed it in 3 weeks ago and she's not certified yet. What's going on? We can go in and look them up and see if we've received their paperwork or not, or sometimes we've received it, but maybe it didn't have everything it was supposed to have with it. we emailed the aide or called the aide and told them, and they haven't sent the stuff back. So at any time, you can call the nurse aide registry and ask a question, and no question is dumb. And don't think that if you call us and ask the question, it's gonna get you in trouble. Okay? We are just there to help you understand what you need to know about the nurse aide, okay? And the other thing about this, when we went to being online verification, we also gave you the opportunity then to print it out because it has the state logo on it. And you can use that and put that in your personnel file. So these are this is the registry verification. The website for the nurse aide is just nar.health.ok.gov. So you can go on there. This was an old slide. We have a new telephone number. Let me give you the new telephone number. It is 426-8150. When they moved, they changed our telephone. And now we do not have actual telephones. Our laptops are our phones, which is good and weird, and sometimes I like it, sometimes I hate it. But that's what we have now. So the main number for the nurse aide registry is 405-426-8150. And then another address that you really need to know is our email address. Because if you don't get us on the phone, or you just want a quick answer, or you want to send paperwork in for someone, the email address is nar@health.ok.gov. So for the long-term care aides on their renewals, we talked about it a little bit earlier. They do not have a fee. You cannot charge a long-term care aide a fee. Okay? So that's why.
What was the email address? I'm sorry. The email address that you just.
Oh, it is nar@health.ok.gov. Since we now have, we had to do this, and I don't think it's on this slide. We now have 2 applications for long-term care aides have an application that is for long-term care only. And it's Form 840, and it's on our nurse aide registry website. If you have an aide that just wants to renew their long-term care, it can be emailed or faxed to the nurse aide registry. It does not have to be mailed in. And we do our emails and faxes right now is taking 3 to 4 business days, which is a lot shorter than having someone mail it in, because we're 4 weeks behind if something gets mailed. So when I said earlier, there's never going to be an excuse for a long-term care aide to have their certification expired. It's because as a facility, you could turn in, we do have facilities that do this, they'll turn in 10 to 15 certifications at one time for their aides. They'll have the aide come in and sign it and fill out, their address and the personal stuff and the attestation that everything's true. But the HR department will fill out the work history, because that is the one thing that long-term care aides have to renew is 8 hours of work, paid work, during the 2 years that they're certified. So if you've got aides that are coming up that need to be renewed, and you can do this 6 months in advance, you can sit down and pull all those, pull the newest form off of the website. Please do not make a bunch of copies of our forms and stick them in a drawer and use them forever, because we do update our forms, okay? So you need to always check on the Nurse Aide Registry website to make sure that you're using the most current form. I'm sorry, but I just feel like I'm getting hoarse. I see renewal application forms that have the date 2009 on them. We are definitely changed since then. So the applications can be found on the Nurse Aide Registry website on the left-hand side, and it says certification renewals. There will be a Form 840 for long-term care only, and then there's Form 717 for everything else, which can include, say I have a CMA and my long-term care, and I want to renew them and I want to do them 6 months in advance. Then if I wanted to do those together, I would use Form 717 and mail it in with everything that was required. But if I just wanted to do my long-term care, I could email it or fax it to the Nurse Aide Registry, and it would be done a lot quicker. We have had to go to where we're doing emails one day and batch work the next day because we've gotten so far behind. So that's why I say if they will send it in, it takes 3 to 4 business days for emails that will try to renew them. And we are getting more and more long-term care certifications renewed through email than anything else. But applications with a fee, they have to be mailed in, and they have to be mailed to the PO box. And that's the difference. The 840 form will give them where it has to go to. The Form 717, I try to tell people that really needs to only be used for those that have to pay in a fee, and that fee has to go to the PO box, not the street address. So this right here is going to be wrong. I told Dee could use this, but I see that we've got a new address. Aides can renew 6 months in advance using the following, and I said the 840. They can mail it in, but I wouldn't. I would just email it or fax it. We don't have in person anymore, so that's gone. We don't have a desk downstairs, so please don't send any of your aides to the health department because we don't work that way anymore. So there's the email. You can also fax in the application, and I need to give you the new fax number. The new fax number they've given us is 405-900-7572. And we put that in the middle of our Nurse Aide Registry website. But so it's on all of our forms. For our website, we had to go in and change every form to show the new address. It had to go through the state informatics to make sure that the logo was right, because we have a new state logo. And then we moved and they changed our website and our forms all at the same time. I mean, it's just been like, oh my God, you want to pull your hair out. And I can't even tell you our new address without having to look it up, because I'm just not used to it yet. I know it's 123 South Kerr Avenue, I think is what it is. Robert S. Kerr South Avenue. 123. But, I don't know the zip and I just don't know it that well. So the fax number 405-426-7572. The only thing that hasn't changed is our email address and our web address. Aides will stay on the registry 30 days past expiration, but actually they stay on a lot longer than that because we have found that it's too much of a hassle to archive an aide and then try to bring them back on, so we leave them on until they're 3 years out, which would mean they would have to retrain. We have now gone to where there is a grace period. Right now, if an aide turns in their paperwork timely, say I expire March 31st, I mail my certification in or I email it in before March 31st, then it is good for 30 days after it expires. Or if the reason it doesn't get renewed in 30 days after expiration is because we are the ones that are running behind, then it is good until we get them renewed. And that's what's going on right now. Okay? So the aide can still work on the floor. For those of you that are working right now, that is what's going on. There is a 30-day grace period notice on our Nurse Aide Registry website that explains some of that. One of the things that we come up against and that we're getting a lot of phone calls on is, well, how do I know if it's there or not?
Yeah.
The only way that you're going to know if it's there or not is if that aide knows the date the check cleared or the money order cleared. The way you know a money order clears is there is a receipt attached to that money order, and on the back of it is a phone number that they can call and find out when it was charged off. And then they can call us. And what we've been doing, if they call us and they don't fall in a grace period, say they expired back in 2020, we'll go in and we will hunt down, if we know when it cleared, we'll go back to that date's work and we'll hunt them down and renew them. We're doing that for people who expired and are not in that grace period, because we don't want anyone being taken off the floor. And I had a girl call me this morning in tears, crying because she got taken off the floor, even though she was in her 30-day grace period. She got taken off the floor. She was trying to find another job and she needed to be renewed. So she was going to get me either work proof that showed that she worked during that time period, and she was going to send me another renewal, because what she did is she mailed in her long-term care, which she didn't need to. She should have just faxed it or emailed it. And so she emailed it to me and I renewed her before I left home. Okay, so that's kind of what we're doing. We're doing the best we can, being 4 weeks behind. If someone calls us, or if you've got someone that expired back in 2020 and are just now trying to get renewed, we will try to go in and find them and renew them if they can give us those dates. Okay? So a facility may not be cited if it can prove application was mailed before expiration. That's something you need to know too. You're okay. You're not going to get in trouble. right now. And also, right now, the surveyors know that we're behind, so they're trying not to look at that too much, unless they get called out because of a staffing issue. Okay, so what might happen to cause an application not to get renewed is that it wasn't filled out completely. They didn't sign the attestation. They didn't provide us any 8 hours of work proof. The work proof, I mean, all they have to do is come up with a pay stub, a W-2 form, or the facility sign that section on a renewal application. Okay, there's a section on a renewal application that says where they worked, they were hired at this date, they either got fired on this date or they still work, and the HR or the administrator or the DON can sign it. Okay, so that has to be filled out, or they have to send in a W-2 or pay stub, or there's no affidavit of lawful presence. Do you guys know what that is? Has anyone said anything about that up until now? An affidavit of lawful presence means that either you're a qualified U.S. citizen or you're a qualified alien. If they are a qualified alien, besides having to send in that affidavit saying they are, they have to send us the front and back of their card. If they're a qualified alien, they should have a card. They can either be a permanent resident, it can be work authorization, but that's something that that is asked on a uniform employment application. And you should have in their personnel file, if they're a qualified alien, the front and back of their card. Okay, but when we renew them, they have to send that to us because we're required in the state of Oklahoma, we are required to run them through SAFE, which is a federal immigration system that we put in their number and it will tell us if they're here legally or not. And sometimes we find out they're not, that they have, the card is not legit, or they've outstayed their time that they should be here, or there can be various other things. So we have to have that. They could also have tax that would keep us from renewing someone. And just because they have a tax hold doesn't mean they haven't paid their taxes. They may have paid taxes this year because they made enough to pay taxes. And the year before that, they didn't, or vice versa. And if Oklahoma slaps a tax hold on you if you don't pay your taxes every year, even though you didn't need to. So sometimes they just have to go up to the Oklahoma Tax Commission and get that taken care of. Or they didn't sign their recertification application. If we find that it's incomplete for whatever reason, if it's a tax hold, we'll send them a problem letter, and the aide will then have to get with the Oklahoma Tax Commission because we can't take the tax hold off. We can't have them call us back and say, I talked to the Oklahoma Tax Commission and they said they sent you an email and I'm clear and I'm good and we didn't get it. We can't do anything until we get that letter from the Oklahoma Tax Commission that actually takes the tax hold off. So when we receive all the documentation back from them after we've sent them a problem notice, that's when we then can process the renewal application. And right there it says process time varies due to workload. At this time, when I did my last workshop, we were 9 days behind, and now we're 4 weeks. So we're doing overtime a what. Okay. What did I, well, let me go back. One thing you need to know, as soon as we hit renew in our database, it shows up on the web immediately. There's no delay, it doesn't show up till the next day. Once we've renewed it, it automatically shows up. So you can go on. If you're on the phone with me and I'm saying, I'm certifying them as we speak, and I hit renew, you should be able then to go to our website, pull it up, print it off, and they're good. So it does it simultaneously. You're always supposed to verify on the website and print out the verification for your files. If you don't find it, call us. Okay, so if the long-term care certification differs from the CMA, CMA certification is only good for 1 year. Long-term care certification is good for 2 years. For the long-term care, if they are 2 years past expiration, or they didn't work during their 2 years that they were certified, then they have to retest. And that's Form 841, and it requires a fee for everyone except long-term care. Long-term care never pays for anything. Okay, remember that. So if they didn't work their 8 hours per pay while certified, they have to retest. And they didn't renew and did not work 8 hours per pay during the 24 months after certification expired. They've been expired over 2 years, but less than 3. They have to retest, and they may retest 1 time only. So if they fail it, they have to go back and retrain. So we don't, that's why I had someone in class one time when I made the statement about particular and you know, taking initiative as the administrator to make sure your HR has some kind of tickler system on your nurse aides. I had someone in class tell me it's not my responsibility. They are adults and they should learn how to take care of their own work. And I just kind of looked, I know I probably looked at him like, are you kidding me? It is your responsibility. The buck stops with you on everything. So you can see it's really not that hard to keep a long-term care aide certified. You're not going to be out any money. HR just has to pull up the form, fill out that little section and call the aide in on the day they work and have them fill out theirs. And then the facility can fax it all to us 1 at a time, please. Don't fax it in 15 because we can't separate them. It's not that easy. We can, but it just makes it harder. So there never should be a reason that the aide gets to this point. Because going back to through training costs. Training can cost anywhere, depending on where they go, from $450 to $900 for training. So you don't want them to have to retest, because if they fail, then you can't hire them. I mean, you can't use them anymore. So just keep them where they don't have to. Also, there was a new law back in November of 2015, and I still have this on here because it's still not being done. They did this because legal had a whole bunch of cases that were staying in pending, because at that time, if they sent a registered letter out on abuse, neglect, or misappropriation, and the aide never picked up the letter and it came back to us, they couldn't proceed with the hearing. So it just stayed impending forever and ever and ever and ever. So we had all these pending cases. And so they decided to change a statute. So now, if an aide moves anywhere from the address that they have given you or us, then they are to notify us of their new address within 10 days. If they don't, the bad thing that happens is if an incident happens and it gets investigated and it's, yes, abuse did happen, then they're gonna get a letter sent out to the old address. They won't get it. It will come back to legal and they didn't pick it up, so here it is. Legal will proceed with the abuse hearing and file abuse on them without them even knowing. So it's really important that you make your aides aware, anytime you move, you have to let, you guys need to have the address and we have to have the address. And it's to their benefit because sometimes on neglect cases, especially if they go to the hearing, they can help fight, they may fight it and may not get it put on. It doesn't always happen that way. Most of the time, legal will not have a hearing unless they're pretty sure that the abuse did happen. But sometimes on neglect, it can kind of change the way the judge views things. Okay, so you want to tell your staff, because most of the time you're going to fire them if you've had an incident. That's just what usually happens, unless you don't think it really was abuse, but you have to send in an incident report anyway. You need to tell that person if the nurse aide registry does not have a current address on you, you better give it to us and give it to them. So if you get a registered letter, you need to pick it up. Because I hate it when people call and they're in tears and crying and they were fixing to go to nursing school and they just found out because they're just now looking at their certification from maybe it could be 5, 6, 7 years ago and find out that they cannot go to nursing school now because they have abuse on them. And they get real, and I would too, I'd be upset. But that's why we need their address. This is pretty much what we've just talked about. So a facility's requirements for long-term care aid is somewhat like the CMA. You have to do a performance appraisal once every 12 months, and you have to do 2 hours of in-service specific to the performance review. And you can find that form on our website. Under training information, there will be all these applications and forms, and the skills performance checklist can be found there. One thing you need to know too, a training and competency examination program, like if you wanted to become a training program, it cannot be offered in a facility which has had in the previous 2 years substandard quality of care, and you can request copies of the CMS 2567 or access them at the clinical site. That's what we tell our training programs. if there's been enforcement due to an RN staffing waiver, if you've received a civil money penalty of $10,483 or more, the operating license has been revoked, Medicaid certification has been terminated, the department may withdraw approval to train if any of those things happen. And it also doesn't mean that you have to be a training program for that to happen. We will also do that to you where you cannot have other training programs come into your facility and have their nurses or their aides train there. It's mainly their aides for us. So if you get any of those things, then your ability to have them come in and do training in your facility goes away. So you can't be used as a training site if the facility has had substandard quality of care on resident behavior and facility practices, quality of life, or quality of care. And you also cannot have a temporary emergency waiver. How many of you know what that is? A temporary emergency waiver allows you to use a student that's in an approved training program for 4 months. Okay? They can come to your facility. They can only do the work that's been checked off on their skills performance checklist, but they can work for you doing those things until they get certified. But it can only be for 4 months. A lot of facilities that are training programs, they definitely want to have this because they're going to use their students and they're going to put them on the floor as they mark off their skills that they're found proficient in. A temporary emergency waiver, the original cost is $100 for 6 months, and then it's $75 every 6 months thereafter. And some facilities are, I think we'll see after with what's going on now with COVID and CMS, is that we may see more facilities become training programs. And I know some may even, if they belong to Care Providers of Oklahoma, they may be able to do the online training program at their facility. Because we do have online training now for CEUs and for CNA training. Such a waiver shall require the following: an individual employed as a nurse aide who is enrolled in a department-approved training program and competency evaluation for nurse aides shall successfully complete such training within 4 months of entering the program. So you cannot use that individual more than 4 months. They have to obtain certification, and the department shall place the nurse aide on the registry within 30 days after they have passed the test. So if they are if you are going to use an aide in training and you've got the temporary emergency waiver, you cannot let them do any skill that they haven't been checked off on at the training program. Your nurse has to be their supervisor. You can't just give them and let them go off with another aide because aides cannot be preceptors. So they have to be supervised at all times by no less than a licensed practical nurse. So, and that doesn't mean that that practical nurse has to be walking hand in hand with them. It just means they have to be in the vicinity. Because we get asked that a lot. You mean our LPN has to be side by side with them? No. They just have to be supervised. And they need to go check on them every now and then and see that they're doing right and make sure that they're okay. And the required training has to be done with a department-approved program. There's a list of those on our Nurse Aide Registry website. So facilities which have approved training, nurse aide training programs can use their RN or LPN to instruct the nurse aide trainees in the facility in accordance with our rules and regulations. So if you would like, if your facility would like to become a training program, they would need to contact Jason Noreen, and there is his email address. It's jason.health.ok.gov. Right now, Jason hasn't been able to go out and do any on-site visits during COVID. CMS has kind of put us on the back burner and said, unless it's just, no, there for a while. I'm hoping that Jason can go out and start doing some surveys, but we'll have to see. So my usual spiel that takes me to 3:30 is over. I hope the three of you and all of you that are out there that I can't see, that you all do well on your test, because I know that's coming up. And I wish you luck in being an administrator. I loved it, but for health reasons had to quit and wanted to go back and do it when I retired, and my husband was like, no, you can't do that. But I've lost my husband, and sometimes I think, I might just still go ahead and do it. You can't do anything now. But it was the job I loved. And I don't know if it's changed, because I had someone in class tell me one time, because one of the things I said, the thing I loved about being a long-term care administrator was that I loved working with elderly individuals. And I worked elder care for a while after I left being an administrator. But there was something about getting hugs and just all kinds of loving from the residents in a facility that was made getting my chest poked on by a family member. It made it okay. It made it worthwhile to know that people were taken care of. I think you got to have a heart that loves people, even nasty people. People who will be mean to you, who will get in your face and call you all kinds of names when you have done the best job that you possibly can. You cannot keep mother out of someone's room all the time. There'll be a lot of things that you never thought you would see that you'll see. But it is a wonderful job, and it's one that I hope brings you a lot of happiness and satisfaction and not too much stress. I remember trying to drag my husband out. Well, he did go out with me a few nights, and we had to snake the plumbing in the facility. So there's all kinds of things that you'll be doing as an administrator. But I hope you all do well and that you enjoy what you're doing. And that is it. I hope that's my last bill ever. It's gonna be weird. At 30 years, it's gonna be different. Right. You guys have a good time, enjoy it, and I wish you the best. Thank you. And now you get to go home early. And I'm not really sure what, I think I'm supposed to hit. In meeting for all.
I don't want to do
Does
it.
he come back in and say anything or?
Typically, he might step in and depends on if he's bored or not.
I don't know if it's in meeting for all or whatever.